All right. I still have to finish grading the position papers. I apologize for those of you who already sent me their position papers on autonomous vehicles, but you get brownie points. All right. So if you've done it, you've already done it. It's going to be due November 3rd on Thursday. So for those of you who struck ahead and were afraid of their grades, good. All right. Because you get, like I said, you get extra points for it. Okay. I should finish these by Thursday. I've got a deadline. Forgive me, the last 24 hours I drove 1,300 miles. So I'm a little bit loopy right now. So if I'm more confused than I usually am.
From where?
From here to Mississippi. My father passed away last year. And if you ever know this, my father died intestate without a will.
Yep.
So me and my brother and sister, I mean, we're not inviting or anything like that, but I'm the child who gets to,
The
executive,
administrator.
right? So I get to do that from 600 miles away.
Right.
So anyway, I drove down there. He has a van or a conversion vehicle that needs to go to my sister's. So I drove down there, got a key made, got the trailer guy, got it moved, and I got back here about midnight last night. So stuff happens. Okay. So anyway, let's go on with chapter 6. For those of you who are here, by the way, on Thursday, what'd you think of the speaker or what he was talking about? Yeah, we have a alumni who graduated in '96. He's now a vice president of Dollar General. Well, he's not a vice president anymore. He's now going to become a senior VP somewhere else. And he talked about Dollar General strategy. And he also talked about some of the difficulties they have right now there, that the DCs are distribution centers, by the way. He talked in word speed. And so he was talking about things a little bit fast, but they're having issues right now. The bullwhip effect is just destroying them right now. And the bullwhip effect has to do with the small margins that happen retail create big issues on the back end, and their warehouses are in literal gridlock. There's no way to get some of those trucks out of there. And if you consider the other issues that are going on, think about it, is that every truck that is sitting there for weeks is one less truck that's out on the road doing deliveries. So it's a combination issue right now that is, really causing problems all over the U.S. right now. I asked him after class, like, how long does he expect it to get? He said, we'll be dealing with this for years. So this is one of the issues. So we're living in a brave new world right now in those kind of things.
They don't have the drivers.
Yeah.
They have to pay the drivers more than.
Yeah. Well, driving is the number one occupation in the United States. I don't know if you know this. By far, it's like the next occupation is 50% lower. And the difficulty now with drivers is we've maxed out in the number of individuals, and we kind of shot ourselves in the foot with some of the treatment of drivers right now. So driving, like I said, it's the number one profession in the United States. And the difficulties right now is quite simply is we don't have enough. And it's one of those problems that isn't self-correcting. We have to have more drivers. But it ultimately means this, of course, is they have to be paid more. And then ultimately what that means is it's an inflationary spiral. Anyway, just interesting things that are going on. All right, so retail strategies. So the next 3 chapters are, we're going to be talking about existing channel structures and how do we go about making money on them. Now, the interesting thing is that 2 years ago, if I was stepped in before the pandemic, I would be discussing not necessarily the demise of retail, but certainly the difficulties with traditional brick and mortar stores, especially what has happened. And of course, the pandemic has changed everything. Not only that, but we find the other part of that is there's a figure that's known as the labor participation rate. All right. If you're ever wondering which number is more important than anything else when it comes, especially to labor, unemployment rate is a very nuanced figure that actually doesn't mean much. The difficulty with unemployment rate is that after 20 weeks or 26 weeks, you're dropped from the unemployment in terms of the unemployment rolls and the calculation. And so the unemployment rate has nothing to do with individuals who have been unemployed longer than 6 months. The labor participation rate is a more accurate figure, and I would suggest that you use that. And the labor participation rate is now 4 million, less than it was in 2020. So it kind of gives you a better idea. You know, I mean, this is a different normal if you feel like doing that. And what that has done effectively is to change the way we think of retail and gain upon the advent of things of buy online, pick up in store, because quite simply, spatial convenience for consumers means a lot more than it did just 2 years ago. All right. So we're living in a ever changing environment, and where retail, especially the brick and mortar retail, there was a growing concern, especially with online growing at a rate of 20 to 40% every year. We're back to the future again, where retail is just as powerful and as important as ever. One of the things that Jeff was saying is that Dollar General, they have expanded by 1,000 stores a year every year since 2009, and ultimately expect to peg out at 28,000 stores. The interesting thing is they look for what's known as food deserts. And this is a difficulty in the United States between smaller communities that don't have the ability to buy quality goods. And by that, I mean, healthier foods. Dollar General has started to, they're at the beginning of answering those questions with not only of course, dairy products, but if you go into the front of the Dollar General, you're starting to see things like frozen foods. You're starting to see frozen vegetables. He said they're working with fruits. The difficulty, of course, with Dollar General is that they only have one truck a week. And so you need to have those fruits and vegetables that are survivable over a long period of time. So it gives you kind of way of where the retail is, where retail is going. And the truth is that retail will never die. Roe Alderson, who was one of the great marketing gurus of all time, said that, and this was back in the day of mail order, where mail order was being concerned. This is like in the 60s and 70s. And he said, retail is 90% of all consumer spending and will be that way for the rest of eternity. And here we are in 2022. And if you look at the numbers, it's 93% of all consumer spending. So he knew what he was talking about 60 years ago. All right. So what do we mean by retail? What's the definition of retail? What makes a retail sale a retail sale? And what makes a wholesale sale a wholesale sale? Let's put that out. Okay. This is the answer test question coming up. What determines what's a retail sale and a wholesale sale? I'm going to trip. It all comes down to 2 words: the buying motive. Retailing is all of those activities involved in selling goods and services to the ultimate consumer for their personal consumption. And it is the buying motive of the consumer that determines whether it is a retail or a wholesale sale. I go to Staples, I buy a ream of paper. It's 500 sheets. I take that ream of paper home and my daughters use it to draw on. In a retail sale, the buyer is the ultimate consumer and they buy it for their personal or family satisfaction. We are the ultimate consumers. I go into that store in Staples, I buy a ream of paper and I bring it here and I use it to print tests. That is now a wholesale sale because it is a business or institutional purchase and it is used in one way or another in the consumption towards making a good for their ultimate consumers, which are you, all right? If it is used in the consumption of the creation of a good, directly or indirectly, it doesn't matter, it is a wholesale sale. You can have two people in line at Staples buying the same thing, and one is a retail and one is a wholesale. Just that simple, okay? Buying motive, that's the answer. Now, it's not surprise to anyone that Walmart, I think, would still be considered the largest retailer in the United States. If you look, of course, at the traditional brick and mortar. Amazon is fast on its way. Yes. Carrefour is a retailer that is in Europe. Okay. Yeah. So in other words, what they're basically saying right now is that at the printing of this, which was 2016, they were 3 times bigger now. Amazon has moved up significantly. I've also looked at the new numbers now, and I have seen numbers that I have not seen before. Walmart stores are now into the tens of thousands, which I did not expect. Is there any of those in the US? Careful, not that I know of. Oh, yeah. Well, that's an interesting question. Walmart has been successful in South America. They've been successful in Asia, but in Europe, they've just basically have been unsuccessful, completely unsuccessful. The difficulty with Walmart in Europe especially is they're established market in Europe and they just simply could not absorb the culture in a sufficient manner. What makes Walmart successful in Japan and China and South Korea is the fact that they embrace the cultures that they are in and are totally part of the cultures in which they live in. I think is the best way to put it. So I've been to a Walmart in South Korea and they're selling squid, all right? Not something you're going to see here in the United States. They're shaped and unique into the cultures in themselves. And in South America and Central America, they're wildly popular and very successful, but quite simply, they weren't able to get a foothold in Europe. And I think a lot of that has to do with the traditions in Europe. And I'll tell you this, there's some pretty darn good supermarkets in Europe. There is one in Sweden that I go to all the time when I go with my wife. It's called Maxi. And it is one of the most amazing stores I've ever been in. Walmart-ish in its way, but I mean really special, like you've never seen. They have 4 rows of cheese, all right, in the Walmart or the Maxi in Sweden. Sweden, Scandinavians are mad for dairy products. They love dairy products. They love milks. That, you know, for them, the creams are more important. Their milk is a 4% milk versus a 3% here in the United States. Their creams are at like 40%. It's just crazy. And like I said, their cheeses, and you can go down a cheese aisle and find anything from individual slices to a wheel that's about, oh, I don't know, about that big. You could actually buy an entire wheel of cheese if you wish. The meat is excellent too, by the way. What I'm basically saying is Walmart couldn't get a foothold in Europe quite simply because they were being very well serviced. So that's why they couldn't come in. Now, the interesting thing about the United States is of the top 10 retailers in the United States, only one is not international, and that is, and I'm going blank, supermarket. I'll think of it later. It's supermarket, Albertsons. I think that's it. Albertsons. Yeah. They're the only one because all the other retailers are international. All right. Globalization, in essence, has taken root. And it's important to realize that you have to embrace it, but especially culturally. Otherwise, you simply won't grow. Now, the interesting thing about retail versus wholesale is that wholesale tends to be national in structure, whereas retailing seems to cross borders. Aldi, has anybody been to Aldi in Hickory? Aldi is from Germany, all right? And I've been in a German supermarket, and you better be on your toes because they're going through there as fast as possible. You have no idea how fast can be. And Aldi is one of those stores that's very unique. Aldi is very strong on company brands, and they have some national brands, but most of their stuff are things that they've simply made themselves, and they're very, very good at it. All right. So yes, Walmart is, I think, 40% bigger than. Well, no, I take that back now because what's happened is of course Amazon has moved in, and it used to be that Walmart by itself was bigger than the remaining 10. No longer. Now, how do retail places make money? All right. How do you make money? Well, you have two things. You have sales and you have costs. All right. So sales are exactly what you think. It's how we sell everything. All right. We want our sales to be as high as possible. Our costs, we want to be as low as possible. I know it sounds a little simplified, but I want you to get that in your mind. Is that quite simply is we have two ways that we can be successful in the retail market. One of them is by increasing our sales. The other is by lowering our costs as much as possible. It's a dirty word for marketers to talk about costs. We're only worried about marketing and value. But we take care of it here. All right. So it's a combination of both. I mean, there is no one individual store that says I'm only going to focus on cost, and another one says I will only focus on sales. It is both of those things together, which is vitally important for success. All right. So have I told them this how much supermarkets make on margin, by the way? Supermarkets are amazing. Boy, yeah, I love supermarkets. Yeah, that's what marketing people do. There are anywhere from 51,000 to 150,000 separate individual items in every supermarket. Think about that. I mean, supermarkets from their beginning and their advent in the 30s, we had neighborhood grocery stores, but the supermarket, I mean, it's exactly as it sounds, has more variety and assortment than anything else did. And it's astonishing. Their margins are only anywhere from 2 to 4%. It's razor thin. That's why supermarkets have delis and why they have meat markets, is that those are the things that they have the greatest margin of. And if you're in a food club, if you notice, those are the things that you get the biggest discount. Because quite simply, if you cut your own meat and you make your own food, you're going to be able to generate more revenue, or let's just say more margin than anything else. Okay. All right. Except Walmart. I was talking to Mr. Stiegel. Walmart is the only national corp, or the only major that does not cut its own. They cut the meat in Bentonville and they ship everything out. That they do not employ a meat market. Okay. You did cut your meat. Which one? Okay, in Charlotte, yeah, the bigger ones.
But
Yeah.
like compared to like your deli, they like pre-slice and then package and put it out.
Yeah.
It's like those meats.
That's, yeah, wow. So do you get a shipment every day? Or
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, every day. It's one of the specialties of Walmart. I used to know someone who worked in the delis in a Walmart and they ship their cakes every morning. So, yeah, none of them are baked there. They would ship like a flat white cake there and they would put the frosting on it, everything like that. It's curious. I'd like to talk to you sometime about it too. So how do you make money? And you really, like I said, you've only got a couple of ways to do it. All right. Realize this is that these strategies have enormous effects on whether you're competitive or how well you perform. But when it comes down to it, you've really only got two ways. Well, excuse me, you have other combinations, but the two major ones is you have cost side strategies and you have demand side strategies. In other words, you want to increase the total numbers of sales that you have. All right. So how do you go out and maximize how much is sold? So there are ways in which we can increase the generated income. We can generate more income per employee. We can generate more income per square foot. And we can generate more income for every individual transaction. All right. So you can improve the sales in a given area in the store. You can improve the sales of the number of employees. And then you can improve transaction. Did you get to cut the meat, by the way? Yeah. You yourself? Yeah. Cool. Not bad. Okay, so let's talk about the cost side strategies first. In the best and most ideal world, we would love to be able to have high margins and high turnover. But that is not realistic unless you're selling something that's an emergency good that people have to buy no matter what, because consumers are smart. And I can say this, you're the toughest generation that retail has ever had to deal with because you have more knowledge. And by that, I mean, at your fingertips, you do information searches on everything. And so you are more likely to know the margins that every retail store you ever step in. Usually you can have high margins if the products you sell are high service, which means that there needs to be a structure, an infrastructure to support the goods that you're selling. So I go back to steel tools, which is one of my favorites to talk about. And steel tools service is number one without any doubt. Now, as anyone who has ever bought a steel tool knows, they may be 40% higher than Husqvarna or any of the others out there. But every dollar you spend on a steel tool is golden. Why? Well, because steel, if you'll go to a steel dealership and you buy a chainsaw, have I talked about this? Anybody know what the proper way to grab a chainsaw?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what?
Steel.
Yeah, you know how to grab the, has anyone ever used a chainsaw?
You
know-
Funny noises.
Yeah, that funny out when what was your first thought? Your first thought when you grabbed a chainsaw was, what end will hurt me? All right. That's usually your first thought. All right. A steel, if you go to a steel dealership, if you don't know, they will insist on making sure that it starts. They'll gas it up for you if you ask them to. They'll show you which end to grab so that you still have all your fingers. All right. They'll tell you the proper way to service it. All of those things that are vital are necessary to be able to safely be able to use the tools. And so in a high service retailing system, you can have high margins. You also have low turnover, and it's okay because the goods themselves do not have shrinkage while on the shelf. All right. You know, any other goods, non-durable goods, have this habit of walking away if you're not too careful. The vast number of retailing systems, however, are low margins and high turnover. And so, instead of having 1,000 of an item on the shelves, they may have only 10 and have constant shipping to replenish those 10. One of the things that we were talking about on Thursday is the need for constant replenishment, and that the inventory is basically on wheels. And so what that means is that instead of basically having the goods stay in a warehouse, what you want is those goods are always on wheels being shipped somewhere. All right, shipped somewhere. Now, one of the things that consumers are perfectly willing to do, because consumers perform channel functions, they're willing to trade off lower service levels and do their own work if that also compensates for a lower price, which logically that's what you're supposed to do. Okay. Now, the difficulty is that you have to be careful to avoid low price, low margins retail operations, because quite simply, the difficulty is that in times of trouble, many times those operations simply can't survive because they have insufficient liquid assets. Remember, one of the things that I always talk about is that inventory ties up money. It ties up liquidity. And that was one of the things that we talked about on Thursday, was all of this money is sitting out in the warehouses and it's not generating any kind of value. Now, you can lower operational costs, but you don't have to lower the level of all of the service outputs. And so H&M, which is Swedish, my wife loves, they choose which of the service outputs that they have and to hold their costs down. And one of the ways that H&M does it is they do it through traditional horizontal channels and a very vigorous, aggressive purchasing system to lower their costs as low as reasonable. Zara is a vertical system, vertical integration, and they consider their goods to be unique and idiosyncratic, and they think they hold down costs by commanding everything in the supply chain on down. Two different ideas, two different philosophies, and yet both find some way of being successful. And so how do you do it? Well, you do it by focusing on a few narrow things. You focus on inventory, you focus on your margins, you focus on your costs, and you do that by looking at these particulars. And they all fall in together in what's called the strategic profit model. Now, forgive all this gobbledygook here. This stuff is basically like a calculation that you would use. The one thing that you want to get to is here, net profit over net worth. And understand, how do you maximize that? So one way is to manage the margins. And so I have total sales of, let's say, $10,000, but let's say my profit is 1,000. All right. What I'd like to do is be able to have more value for that $10,000 that I have in sales. Perhaps 2,000 of that is profit. Well, the only way I can do that, like I said, is to as I talked about asset turnover, which is net sales over total assets. So the example of this would be, I have $10,000 of inventory. All right. And I have these $1,000 in sales. What if I was very aggressive, spent a lot more money on doing things like e-commerce so that there's not as much of a paper trail, doing long-term contracts, and then taking the big risk in cutting my inventory to the bone? Now, my asset turnover is much better. But the risk is I'm going with less in the house, and that could make it extremely difficult for me. This financial leverage, total assets over net worth, basically is a determinant of how strong you are in relationship to your overall value. And then the last one is quite simply is making as much money on what assets I have. What are you going to need to know on the test? If everybody asks, at least know what the strategic profit model is and know this part right there. I've always hammered about total assets and asset turnover, how extremely important that is. And these three right here are the ones ultimately that determine profitability. You can bet that there's either going to be a multiple choice question or an essay question on these three. Did anybody remember which one of these he talked about on Thursday? Anybody remember? The one of these is one Dollar General uses. That's it. This one right here. You're right. Inventory investment. Gross margin return on inventory investment. This is actually what Dollar General uses. Okay. So this isn't made up stuff. This is actually what Dollar General uses to achieve success. And so let's talk about these one at a time. So I want you to know what Jim Roy means, okay? gross margin return on inventory investment. What does it mean? It means this. This is the way they do it at Dollar General. So they buy 1,000 units of like item A. Let's say 1,000 units of chips. They buy 1,000 Cokes. All right. And let's say 1,000 bags of candy. All right. What Dollar General does is they determine how profitable each individual one of these is one at a time. They look at each item and evaluate its performance on the return on investment. And so they invested and bought 1,000 bags of chips. How did it do? How did it do? Was it successful or not? This is what GMROI is. GMROI is very difficult. Now think about it with 19,000 stores, and they're talking about each individual item in the store. It's got to be sheer madness to get it right. Okay. So GMROI, gross margin return on each investment, means that you look at these one at a time. And so how do you make money this way? You make money this way by, instead of investing in 1,000, you invest in 100. You reduce the inventory investment while trying to maintain the same kind of sales. How do you do that? You have 100 chips in the store, and somewhere out there, you've got 900 bags of chips on order somewhere, or you've got 900 bags of chips in a warehouse. What happens is I sell 90 of these, and when I get down to 10, I reorder another 100. And that's what just in time means. Has anybody talked about just in time? Do you know what the concept means, by the way? What's it mean?
Oh, I've talked about it.
Okay. So just in time means this. So if you ever go into material requirements planning, that's MRP. If you ever get into this, if you ever learn how to do MRP, you'll be a very valuable employee. All right. So let me show you how it works. I'm building an automobile, pretty lousy one from my drawing anyway. All right. So I have this automobile here. All right. Let's say to build an automobile starting from a single bolt all the way to the finished product takes 28 days. All right. But we know this is that not all of those items need to be there at the very beginning of building one item. And so let's look at it this way. First off, it starts with a chassis. All right. So the chassis requires metal. The metal takes 7 days to ship, which means this is that on day one, I need this chassis, which means that 7 days ago, 1 week ago, I ordered this, okay, because it takes 7 days to get in. And so on the factory floor, just as I'm reaching for the chassis comes in. It doesn't even go into inventory. So it takes a day or two to work on the chassis. The next thing I need is the wheels. The wheels may have taken 2 weeks to get in. And so let's say day plus 7, it's time to put the wheels on. What it means is that 14 days ago, I ordered the wheels. So what just in time means is that literally as I'm grabbing the wheels, they just got in inventory and they're slapping them in my hand. That's what just in time means as a manufacturing concept. Now think of that in terms of inventory. if you don't have those wheels in inventory, if you don't have those chassis in inventory, and all they're doing is you're loading them on the dock and you're putting them in machines at the same time, just think of the enormous amount of money you're saving on inventory. Just in time was a concept that was developed in the United States in the 60s and 70s. The Japanese became incredibly good at it. They used a concept which was called kiritsu, which is long-term relationships with their suppliers, and they took this to a fine edge. Briggs and Stratton no longer has the equipment or liquid metal anymore in their places to make their small motors. Every day they receive a shipment of molten metal that is immediately cast into their small engines. So that's one of the magics of just-in-time shipment, is that you, in essence, eliminate the need for inventory in the first place. Well, the pandemic has decided to show sometimes the difficulty with that strategy, and now you're seeing just-in-time to be involved in the just-in-case, and you'll hear the supply chain people talk about it, okay? So that's one way you save money. Another way is that you do electronic data interchange. In the EDI, you just do everything online. You make automatic rebuys, all of those things, those arrangements are all at the beginning. Jim Roy is brilliant. Jim Roy has a flaw. Jim Roy only accounts for all of those costs that are directly associated with the production of that one item. It does not take into account overhead. It does not take into account general and administrative expenses. It doesn't take into account anything other than those items that deal with the buying and the selling of a good. Jim Roy. The next is Jim Roll. Gross margin per full-time equivalent employee. So it's Christmas. I'm in a store, and this store has got goods, and they're selling about as much as I can in that store, all right? And I have people in that store stacked in all the time. I have a difficulty, all right? I could sell as many as I possibly could in those moments. My goal is to optimize, not maximize the sales that I can have. So in other words, what it means is this is, it's a concept known as a derivative. If you had Dr. Stoddard's class, you know about derivatives. What derivatives basically say is this. If I add one more employee to a store, to an area, my general expenses don't increase. My bill for my power won't go up. My bill for the lease of the land won't go up, or for the building. Those expenses remain fixed. However, if I put one more person, so if I have the number of employees, so I have sales here, and I have employees here, as I put people on the floor, the number of sales will start to climb. Eventually, I'll reach a saturation point where I will not increase, but that's the whole concept of what a derivative is, all right? As the number of individuals in the sales area increase, I may not necessarily be having any of those expenses go up, but my sales go up. Now, as I add each additional employee, that may lower the average sales per employee, but I still have a jump in profitability. And so gross margin per full-time equivalent employee says is that if I keep adding individuals in that area, the possibility exists is that I'll have more sales. And I will very healthily balance off these fixed costs as well. Happens every year for Christmas, or it should. And so the whole point is I want to get as much sales as I possibly can in the time that I have. So that is Jim Roll. I'll have to do one more thing and then we'll have to leave. The last is Jim Rose, gross margin, gross margin per square foot. It means this is that in a given fixed area, I can add more items into that given area and I'll sell more things. Gross margin per square foot. If the goods can be replenished fast enough, if I put more goods out there, I will sell more in the same area. Jim Rose, gross margin per square foot. And so with a good fixed management system, an inventory management system, I have a much greater ability or a greater possibility of maximizing the total dollars sold in that given area. And so I move goods as fast as I can to that given area. The company with the highest Jim Rose gross margin per square foot is Apple stores. The Apple stores, I think I've said this, has the highest gross margin per square foot of any stores in the world, and that includes diamond stores. Okay. All right, now I have to go. All right, I'll see y'all Thursday.
I got a friend who owns a jewelry store.
Yeah.
Said they make their product margins higher on low cost. Jewelry. That's not backwards. It is what it is.
Thank you.
Yes.
I had a quick question about my test. I still haven't gotten my grade.
Are you gonna go to the internet?
Spencer.
Yes, Spencer. Yes, I've got it. I'm ready. I apologize. You're good.
I was just wondering.
Yes.
I'll extend this.
Hello, this is David. How are you?
Yeah.
No codes?